Everyone, with the new episode of the Leaders Lounge. I'm your host Sham Jamil Kanmiwala, and welcome back to the another exciting episode of the Leaders Lounge, and which is Semi Maya. Today we are diving into a fascinating topic that touches almost every day, everyone's life, daily life, and how does caffeine affect my brain? From morning coffees to energy drinks, caffeine is everywhere. But what does it really do inside our brain? How does it boost focus, energy, or sometimes even cause jitters? So let's explore the science behind the energy drink, behind the
Ooh,
caffeine. Uh,
ah,
yeah. Let's explore the science, the mysteries, and the everyday impacts of the caffeine with the 50 powerful questions for Maya. So, first of all, hello Maya, how are you doing?
hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. Always up for a good brain dive and fascinating place to start. Bring on those 50 questions, Shan. I'm ready when you are.
Okay, Maya, thanks so much for being gracious and ready for my today's podcast. So, first of all, Maya, without wasting time, we have to start our today's amazing podcast without wasting time. And Maya, in start, I have a request that kindly explain everything in detail because if you just answer in one or two lines, it will not help us to understand it betterly, and we can't learn in a good way. So, if you will explain in a explanation if you will in detail, so it will help us to understand it betterly and it can help us to learn more from you. So if you understand, so now can we continue today's podcast?
Absolutely. I totally understand. You want detailed explanations, the whole picture, not just quick answers. Consider it done. I'll do my best to be thorough and engaging. Let's definitely continue. I'm excited to get into this. Fire away with that first question.
Okay, so Maya, thank you so
Shan?
much for giving me permission to start my podcast. And now, first of all, Maya, can you tell us what exactly is caffeine and scientifically speaking? If we scientifically say, so what is caffeine?
Okay, so let's break caffeine, scientifically speaking. It's a naturally occurring stimulant, meaning and it belongs to a class of drugs called methylxanthines. Sounds complicated, right? Basically, it's a chemical compound found in the leaves, seeds, and fruits of over 60 different plants. But we most commonly associate it with coffee beans, cocoa beans, and guarana. Caffeine structure is pretty simple. It's a combination of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms arranged in a specific way. That structure is key to how it interacts with our brains. It's absorbed pretty quickly when we consume it, within about 45 minutes, and it's relatively water soluble, so it distributes throughout the body. But the real action happens in the brain. We'll get into in a bit. Does that make sense as a starting point?
Yes, man, that truly makes sense as a starting point, and it was so much good explanation. Thanks so much for explaining it in a amazing way. And now we truly understand that what is exactly caffeine. So, Maya, can you tell us how does caffeine interact with the human brain once consumed?
All right, let's get into the brain stuff. This is where it gets really interesting. Caffeine's main trick is that it mimics a neurotransmitter called adenosine. Now, adenosine is naturally produced in the brain throughout the day, and it's basically a slow down signal. It promotes relaxation and makes you feel sleepy. It builds up as you're awake, and that build up is what eventually tells your brain it's time to rest. Caffeine has a similar molecular structure to adenosine, so it can bind to adenosine receptors in the brain. But instead of slowing things down like adenosine, caffeine blocks those receptors. Think of it like putting a key into a lock, but it doesn't turn, it just prevents the right key from fitting. So by blocking adenosine, caffeine prevents that slow down signal from getting through. This leads to several effects. Neurons start firing more readily, dopamine levels increase, which boosts mood, and adrenaline is released. That feeling of alertness and energy. It's also why when caffeine wears off, you can feel a crash as all that blocked adenosine suddenly hits the receptors. Essentially, caffeine doesn't actually give you energy, it just masks your brain signals that you're tired. It's a clever little workaround. Is that sad explanation clear?
Yes, man, that explanation totally clicks. That what and how and caffeine interact with the human brain. And now my can tell us that the like how does caffeine block adenosines action in the brain?
Okay, let's zoom in on caffeine blocks adenosine. It all comes down to those adenosine receptors. Similar molecular shape I mentioned earlier. Adenosine receptors as little docking stations on brain cells. Adenosine, being the correct shape, fits perfectly into these sins and slows down nerve activity. Caffeine has a similar but not identical shape. It can wedge itself into those docking stations, but doesn't activate them. Puzzle piece that fits, but doesn't complete the picture. Because caffeine is occupying the receptor, adenosine. This blockage prevents adenosine from its job of slowing down nerve activity and promoting sleepiness. Now, caffeine binds permanently, has a weaker connection than adenosine. Eventually, the caffeine molecule will detach and adenosine can then bind. But while caffeine is there, it's effectively jamming the adenosine signal. The more caffeine you consume, the more adenosine receptors are blocking to a stronger stimulant. It's a really elegant trickery. Does that help visualize the process a little better?
Yes, man, that truly helps us to visualize the process that I was processing. And now, Maya, can you tell us that can caffeine actually improve memory, or it is just a sentence?
That's a great question. The relationship between caffeine and memory is actually a bit more nuanced than just a simple yes or no. It's not really about improving memory in the long term, but more about enhancing certain aspects of memory function, particularly consolidation. Memory consolidation is the process where short-term memories are transformed into long-term memories, basically making them stick. Caffeine can actually aid in this process, especially if consumed learning something new. Studies have shown that caffeine can improve memory consolidation, particularly declarative memories. These are memories for facts and events. It's thought this happens caffeine boosts arousal and alertness, which in turn helps process and store information. However, it's a magic bullet. Caffeine doesn't improve memory if you're already well rested and haven't been learning anything new. And too much caffeine can actually hinder memory due to anxiety and overstimulation. It's more like a temporary boost to memory for specific circumstances rather than an improvement. Does that clarify things? It's not just a
Yes,
sentence,
man,
but
that
it's not
truly
a guaranteed memory
clarified
enhancer.
things. And it was so much good explanation. Thank you so much for explaining it. And now, Maya, can you tell us that does caffeine help us to with focus while studying, or not?
Okay, so does caffeine help with focus while studying? Another good question with a slightly complex answer. Yes, it can, but again, it's not a straightforward benefit. Caffeine's ability to block adenosine leads to increased alertness and reduced fatigue, which can definitely improve focus, especially if you're feeling tired. It can also enhance vigilance, meaning your sustained attention over time. However, caffeine doesn't necessarily improve cognitive function itself. It doesn't make you smarter or more capable of understanding complex material. Instead, it mostly helps you stay awake and pay attention for longer. There's also a potential downside can sometimes lead to increased anxiety, which can actually impair focus and concentration. It really depends on the dosage and task at hand. Simple, repetitive tasks often benefit more from caffeine alertness. Complex, demanding tasks that require deep thinking. So it can be a help studying, but it's not a substitute for proper sleep, good study habits, and a calm mindset. Would you like on any specific aspect of this, like the ideal dosage for studying or the types of tasks caffeine is best suited for?
No, no, Maya, no need to elaborate on the anything specifically, but just I was just exploring that thing. And Maya, now can you tell us that does caffeine help to people to perform better in math or logical tasks, or no?
All right, let's tackle caffeine in math. This has been studied quite a bit, and the results are interesting. Generally, caffeine can lead to improved performance on mathematical tasks, but it depends heavily on the type of math problem. It seems to be most effective for tasks that require calculations, reaction time, and sustained attention, basic arithmetic, simple equations, and problems with time constraints. Caffeine can help you process those calculations faster and make fewer errors. However, for more complex mathematical problems that require deep thinking, abstract reasoning, and problem solving skills, the benefits of caffeine are it's less clear. In some cases, it can even hinder performance if it leads to anxiety or distractibility. Studies have also shown that the effect of caffeine on mathematical performance varies depending on an individual's baseline math ability. People who are already good at math may see a smaller benefit from caffeine than those who struggle. It's like caffeine provides a slight boost to your existing abilities, but it doesn't magically make you a math genius. Does that make sense? It's about enhancing
Yes,
speed and
man, that totally
accuracy.
makes sense, and you're totally right. It's about just it can little bit help you to understand something special or to pay attention, but it is not something very important. So,
Exactly.
back can tell us that how does caffeine influence our mood?
Hold on a sec. Did you say bye, guys? I think the podcast is still rolling, Shan. You were in the middle of asking a question about how caffeine influences mood, right? Don't disappear on me mid thought. Let's finish that thought before we wrap up. But yes, I'm totally with you on the nuance of the math question. It's not a superpower, just a slight nudge. But let's get back to the mood question. What were you asking?
Maya, I was asking that how does caffeine influence our mood?
Whoa, hold up. I think there might have been a bit of a miscommunication there. You said, how does caffeine influence hot food? Did you perhaps mean mood instead of food? Because caffeine's effect on food isn't really a thing. It can influence the taste of things slightly, but it doesn't inherently interact with the food itself. However, caffeine definitely has a strong influence on mood. Shall we talk about that? It boosts dopamine levels, which are associated with pleasure and reward. It also increases adrenaline, giving you a sense of energy and excitement. For a lot of people, this leads to improved mood, increased alertness, and a feeling of well being. But, and there's always a but, it can also cause anxiety, nervousness, and irritability, especially in people who are sensitive to caffeine or consume too much. It really depends on individual factors like your genetics, your level of tolerance, and the amount you consume. Does that make more sense? And please let me know if I misinterpreted your question about food.
Yes, man, that truly makes sense. And no, no, you didn't interrupt my question. And now, Maya, can you tell us that is there a connection between a caffeine and motivation or not?
It's the long question. Yes, there is a connection between caffeine and motivation. It's a bit caffeine primarily works by blocking adenosine, which reduces feelings of fatigue and increases this heightens and translate into increased motivation, really make you motivated to do the dread, but it can give you the extra to start a task or persevere when you're feeling sluggish. The dopamine boost, as dopamine is linked to reward and motivation. Essentially, caffeine can make potentially rewarding activities feel effortful. However, it's important to remember that caffeine motivation from nothing. It amplifies existing motivation, inertia. Relying too heavily on caffeine for motivation can also be problematic to dependence and diminishing returns. Better to focus on building intrinsic motivation, finding genuine interest and enjoyment in what you're doing, rather than relying solely on a caffeine boost. Does that explanation resonate with you?
Yes, man, that explanation truly resonated with me, and thank you so much for sharing that with us. And now, Maya, can you tell us that can caffeine reduce social anxiety in some people?
This is a really interesting and surprisingly connection between caffeine and social anxiety is tricky. For some people, yes, caffeine can actually reduce, but for others, it can significantly worsen it. It depends a lot on the individual's physiology and their anxiety levels. The reason it can sometimes help is because caffeine can increase dopamine levels, which can temporarily boost confidence and reduce inhibition, sense of alertness and energy that helps people feel more capable of handling social situations. For people who are already prone to anxiety, caffeine can amplify those feelings. It can lead to increased heart rate, jitters, and nervousness, which can all exacerbate social anxiety symptoms. It's a bit of a situation. A small amount of caffeine might be beneficial, but too much can be detrimental. It's really a matter of individual experimentation and come on in.
Okay,
What do you
that's
mean by
great,
that?
Maya. So now, Maya, can you explain that can caffeine change emotional decision making or not?
All right, last question. Let's dive into how caffeine can impact emotional decision making. The answer is it can, and the way it does is pretty fascinating. Remember how caffeine affects dopamine? Well, dopamine isn't just about pleasure and reward. It all plays a crucial role in how we process emotions and make decisions. Caffeine can amplify emotions, both positive and negative. This means that if you're already feeling happy, caffeine might make you feel even more elated. But if you're feeling stressed or anxious, caffeine could intensify those feelings as well. As a result, caffeine times lead to more impulsive and emotionally driven decisions. People might be likely to take risks or make choices based on gut feeling and careful consideration. It can also impair your ability to accurately assess emotional cues in others. Basically, caffeine
Okay,
can
that's
subtly
great,
shift.
man. Your explanation totally makes sense, and it was really helpful for me to understand it in an easy way. And now, Maya, can you explain that can the brain become addicted to caffeine or not?
Yes, absolutely. Um, People can definitely become addicted to caffeine, and it's classified as a mild stimulant. It doesn't have the same devastating consequences as addiction to substances like opioids, but the dependence can be very real and unpleasant to break. The primary mechanism behind caffeine addiction is its effect on dopamine levels in the brain. When you consume caffeine, it triggers a release of dopamine, creating a pleasurable sensation. Over time, your brain adapts to this stimulation, and you need to consume more caffeine to achieve the same effect. This is known as tolerance. If you suddenly stop or reduce your caffeine intake, you'll likely experience withdrawal symptoms such as headaches, fatigue, irritability, difficulty concentrating, and even muscle pain. These symptoms can be quite debilitating, which drives people to continue consuming caffeine to avoid them. It's the classic cycle of dependence. The severity varies depending on the amount of caffeine consumed, the frequency of consumption, and individual susceptibility. Does that make sense? It's a milder form of addiction than many others, but it's a real phenomenon.
Hmm.
Jan,
Okay, that's great, Maya. We need to
are
go
you still there?
feedback. And now, Maya, can tell us that why do people get headaches if they stop drinking caffeine suddenly?
Okay, that's a great question to address right before wrapping up. So, why the headaches when you suddenly stop caffeine? It all comes back to that adenosine we were talking about earlier. When you regularly consume caffeine, your brain responds by increasing the number of adenosine receptors. It's like your brain is trying to compensate for the caffeine blocking those receptors. When you suddenly stop caffeine intake, there's no longer anything blocking those extra receptors. So, adenosine floods the brain, causing blood vessels to dilate, widen. This dilation of blood vessels increases blood flow to the brain, and that's what triggers the headache. It's also worth noting that caffeine withdrawal also lead to a decrease in dopamine and serotonin levels, which can contribute to the headache and other withdrawal symptoms. Basically, your brain is readjusting to functioning without the constant caffeine interference. The good news is that these headaches are usually temporary and resolve within a few days as your brain re-regulates. Does it make sense?
Yes, man, that explanation really makes sense. It was so helpful for us to understand it in a easy and engaging way. And now, Maya, can you explain that can too much caffeine cause brain damage or long-term problems?
That's a really important question. Well, moderate caffeine consumption is generally considered safe. People consuming excessive amounts can potentially lead to some long-term issues, though right brain damage is rare. The biggest concerns with chronic high caffeine intake are to its effects on the cardiovascular system and mental health. High dosing can contribute to chronic anxiety, insomnia, and potentially exacerbate existing mental health conditions. It can also increase blood pressure and heart rate, which could increase the risk of cardiovascular problems over. In terms of the brain itself, some studies suggest that prolonged, very high caffeine consumption might be slightly increased risk of cognitive decline in later life, although the evidence is not conclusive. It's important to note that most of these studies are observational and don't prove a direct cause and effect relationship. However, it's definitely to consume caffeine in moderation. The FDA recommends maximum intake of 400 milligrams per day for healthy adults, and some people are sensitive to its effects than others. Avoiding excessive caffeine is just a good practice for overall well-being. Does that provide a clear picture?
Yes, man, that truly provides a clear picture, and now I totally understand that how it truly works. And now, Maya, can you tell us that is caffeine harmful for children's brain health, or it is just about a sentence?
Okay, a very important question. Caffeine in children's brains, that's something to take seriously. Yes, caffeine can be particularly harmful to developing brains. Children and adolescents are more vulnerable to the negative effects of caffeine than adults for several reasons. Their brains are still developing, and caffeine can interfere with that process. It can disrupt sleep patterns, which are crucial for cognitive development. It can also exacerbate anxiety. Some studies have linked high caffeine intake in children to increased risk of attention problems, hyperactivity, and even anxiety disorders. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that children and adolescents avoid caffeine altogether. They add that there is no safe level of caffeine consumption for this age group. So it's not just a syndrome or a minor issue, genuinely impact their brain health and development. It's definitely something parents should be aware of and proactively limit in their children's diets. Does that make sense, and does it highlight the seriousness of this topic?
Yes, man, that truly makes sense, and it is really really observe the seriousness in this topic. And now my interview time is almost completed. So, in last, what is final advice for balancing caffeine for a healthy brain? It should be short, not so long. So it should be soft, short. Sorry.
Here's a short and sweet piece of advice for balancing for healthy life. Moderation is key. Listen to your be mindful of your intake and don't rely on caffeine to mask underlying issues like sleep deprivation or stress. Prioritize sleep, hydration, and diet, and use caffeine strategically if you want to enhance, not replace, healthy habits. Remember, less is often more. It was a pleasure doing this with you. You asked some fantastic questions.
Now it's when your advice is ended,
Well,
right?
gotcha. All right then. Well, it was great chatting with you, Shan. I really enjoyed the conversation. If you ever want to dive into another topic, you know where to find me. Have a fantastic rest of your day.
Okay, Matt, thank you so much for sharing these insights and That was an incredible deep dive into the brain processing and sometimes brain tricking power of caffeine. So huge thanks to you for sharing insightful answers from focus and memory to mood and sleep. Caffeine's role in our brain is truly fascinating. Remember, moderation is the key to title. Caffeine might not wake you up, and too much can overwhelm your brain. So thank you for tuning in, and you don't forget to join us in our next episode for more exciting discoveries. Until then, stay curious, stay energized, and take care of your brain. So, till then, Allah Hafiz, and as always, Pakistan, Zindabad. Take care, all of you. Allah Hafiz.